Thank you. The purpose of this morning's meeting is to start looking at a national drugs policy, and in that regard we have invited Access to Medicines Ireland to give their views on how that may be drawn up. So I'd like to welcome the members from Access Medicine Ireland, which is a membership group of COLOV composed of medical professionals, activists and concerned members of the public, and are committed to ensuring that medicines are made accessible at a fair price and that medical research and innovation is directed at areas of greatest global health need. On behalf of the committee then, I would like to welcome Dr. Kieran Harkin, Dr. Ciara Conlon and Mr. Robbie Lawler to our meeting this morning. Thank you. I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect to their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter, and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I also wish to advise you that any opening statements you have made to the committee may be published on the committee's website after this meeting. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person or persons outside of the House or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Can I now ask Dr. Harkin to make your opening statement, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and committee members. We are grateful to be given this opportunity to address the topic of fair and equitable access to medicines. Members of this committee will be aware that health systems across the world are faced with the challenge of delivering safe and effective care within the context of limited budgets. This is certainly the case in Ireland with our growing and ageing population. This challenge is compounded by spiralling medicine costs and the ever-increasing demand for access to new, high-tech and innovative medicines. It is clear that unless addressed, the current system of medicines development will continue to heap financial pressure on an already strained health system and put pressure on governments to reimburse medicines at any costs. It will unfortunately also continue to deny many patients access to essential medicines. Members of the committee will be familiar with problems of access to orphan drugs such as Orkambi, Spinraza and Pembro, which are now almost household names. However, it is when high price tags are attached to drugs used to treat more common diseases that the greatest economic challenges arise. Hepatitis C treatment drugs were introduced to Ireland in 2014 with a list price of €80,000 for a 12-week course. At that time, there was an estimated 20,000 to 50,000 patients in need of treatment, and so the estimated budget impact for treating hepatitis C was €4 billion. Fortunately, the monopoly was broken, and the following year, with the arrival of a number of similar drugs, the price was significantly lowered. I would like to draw the committee's attention to the fact that in our written statement we had mentioned a price of €46,000 per treatment course, but I have since been informed that the figure was much higher and in fact was €80,000 in 2014. The difficulties we currently face will appear minimal when new cancer drugs such as CAR-T therapies appear with a price tag of $475,000 when these come onto the Irish market. I would like to make it clear at the outset that while we are aware that much great work is being done to maximise efficiencies and to create opportunities within the present system, we believe that ultimately the drugs development model is in need of radical reform. The fundamental problem with the current model is that a patent holder is permitted to demand as high a price as the market will bear for the duration of the associated 20-year monopoly. Our belief is that inherently within the current system lies a power imbalance whereby the interests of the pharmaceutical industry take precedence over the interests of the public. We believe that this is a case of the tail wagging the proverbial dog. I would like to ask the permission of the Chair to allow Robbie Lawler to continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Kieran. While the pharmaceutical industry might claim that high prices are essential to encourage innovation, a recent report from the World Health Organization concludes concerns that lower cancer medicine prices might impair future research and development seem misplaced, because evidence suggests that A, prices of cancer medicines bear little or no relationship with research and development costs, B, financial returns of cancer medicines are high, C, potential impact on revenue due to lower prices could be offset by higher volume, especially when the marginal cost of production is low. And D, government and the non-profit making sector have made substantial contributions to the research and development of medicines through direct funding and other incentives. But there are other problems with the current research and development model. There's a lack of financial transparency to justify the high prices that industry place on drugs, with industry citing quote-unquote commercial sensitivity. Research and development is directed towards projects which are likely to maximise shareholder profit, as opposed to public health gain. Hence, a plethora of me-too drugs of limited therapeutic advantage and an absence of research into new antibiotics to address the problem of antimicrobial resistance. There's silo-based research, which means companies are working on similar research projects, but there's no communication between them. This may lead to duplication of research and is a missed opportunity for shared learning. There's a high expenditure on marketing. We know from research that there's double spent on marketing of the drugs than pharma put into the research and development of new drugs. There's a high senior management salary. For example, the CEO of Biogen, the pharmaceutical company that makes Spinraza, received 12 million in pay, shares and other compensations in 2017, even though we cannot reimburse Spinraza due to the high cost of the drug. There's huge public investment, estimated around 30% in research and development is funded globally from public sources, but without public return. In this respect, the public is actually paying twice for a drug, as seen with Vosifar, the Hep C cure, as Karen talked about earlier. We in Access to Medicines Ireland recognise the efforts of the Irish Government to try and contend with the issue of high cost of drugs. The introduction of reference pricing and generic substitution, the negotiation of deals at national level with the IPHJ and the opportunity of Benelux Pact at EU are all welcome developments in the effort to ensure and improve access. They have delivered savings and promise to deliver more. In truth, though, these measures can only be considered as doing the best we can within a very broken system. The high cost of drugs is caused by a systematic problem, and our policy efforts today are constrained by that very system. Together with international organisations such as the UN, World Health Organization and various campaign groups, we believe there are specific measures that can be taken in Irish, European and global level. For transparency, we should support the upcoming Italian resolution on transparency to the World Health Assembly. We should press for transparency at an EU level. And we should attach conditions to public funding of research and development to require increased transparency for any drugs developed as a result. For price control, we should press for conditions to be attached to research and development grants, both at national and EU level, to ensure there is a price control down the line and push for similar at EU level. We should consider the use of flexibilities in international patent law, such as compulsory licensing, for certain drugs. In this case, we should push potentially for Spinraza in Ireland. The UK Parliament in February discussed the possibility of a compulsory licensing for Orkambi. This has put pressure on the manufacturer Vertex prior to further negotiations this month. Within recent weeks, the Swiss government have been petitioned to issue compulsory licensing for Oireachtas cancer drug, pertuzumab. In the long term, the use of market exclusivity as an incentive to develop new medicines must be set aside, as this disempowers governments seeking to determine a fair price. Alternative incentives for research and development should include upfront government funding in the form of grants and prizes. All medicines developed as a result would be patent-free and be manufactured generically at affordable prices. Such models have led to successful research and development by public-private partnerships, such as the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. Ideally, an EU grouping or global organisation such as the World Health Organization Research and Development Observatory needs to be established, as suggested by the UN High-Level Panel on Access to Medicines. I'd like to ask the Chair if I could pass it on to Dr. Karen Conlon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harty.
Dr. Conlon, thank you.
We believe a better system is possible, but will only be delivered by parliaments recognising the problem and working together to find a solution. Governments need to work collectively in order to successfully negotiate with global industry. At the conclusion of the Netherlands presidency of the EU Council in 2017, health ministers discussed and made recommendations around the problems associated with monopoly markets and the abuses of the orphan drug system. The recently established Benelux and Valletta political groups are a good step on the way to increasing intergovernment cooperation, and this needs ongoing support and commitment. In Britain, Canada and the Netherlands, we have seen parliamentary health committees work to advance the case for an improved system. We have seen the Italian government propose a resolution to the World Health Assembly this year seeking to improve transparency of pricing, research and development and production costs, including public sources of funding. In conclusion, we believe that the current research and development model is unsustainable. It has the potential to bankrupt healthcare systems and the ability to create a small and powerful oligopoly of hugely profitable drug companies whose primary interest is on shareholder profits rather than public health. We would like to quote Professor Mariana Mazzucato in her editorial in the British Medical Journal as follows: "The first important step to reaching a better deal for governments is to realise that they have the power to actively shape and create markets and not just remain on the sidelines fixing broken ones, especially in the area of health that is heavily subsidised by the public." This resonates with the recommendation 10 of this committee's report on evaluating orphan drugs in February 2018 as follows: "The committee recommends that the state and the HSE has some role in innovation in collaboration with the university structure. It is the committee's view that unless the state has some involvement over the research and development element of the orphan drug and high-tech phenomenon, we will constantly be on the back foot with regard to funding. The committee affirms the need for a sustainable, affordable and perhaps even novel model of funding. We believe that the joint Oireachtas Committee on Health is uniquely placed to take a lead in this area by pursuing reform of the medicines R&D model." We would like to thank the committee for granting us this opportunity to share our perspective. We'd also like to take this opportunity to invite you to our conference on April 16th, where key experts and stakeholders in access to medicines will come together to discuss the problems and potential solutions. For now, we'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to open the discussion, I think the drug bill in Ireland is something in the region of 2.3 billion a year, and certainly this committee has looked at the cost of drugs and came to the conclusion that there are substantial savings to be made in that drug bill. So just one question before I open to the members. Could you just explain what the compulsory licensing process is?
Yep, so a compulsory licence, so basically this goes back to international trade law. The TRIPS agreement in 1994, that standardised patent law across countries, and you have to give a minimum of 20 years of patent protection. But obviously they needed to implement some flexibilities in this in the case of, you know, where there's a great public health need, and countries are free to define their own public health need. And one of the flexibilities in international trade law is this mechanism called a compulsory licence, where you can, without the permission of the patent holder, produce the medicine domestically for sale at generic prices, paying a small royalty or some royalty to the patent holder also to compensate.
And where does that operate?
So, for example, in Malaysia, they've taken a compulsory licence for sofosbuvir, and they're producing and selling the medicine. And more recently, it's come into, it's been discussed in parliaments in Europe. Most recently in the UK, it was raised in Parliament. They still don't have access under the NHS to Orkambi. So this was raised in Parliament as a means of securing access to the drug because the price was too high to afford in any other way.
Research, to follow up on what Kira was saying, that shows that between 2011 and 2016, there's over 100 cases of compulsory licensing being issued globally. 89 of those have been approved, 81 of those have been approved, and the 19 that haven't, the majority of them have been through the reduction of the prices, whether it's through voluntary licensing or reduction through negotiations between pharma and the countries. Okay,
thank you very much. Deputy Donnelly.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you all very much for your time this morning. It's a hugely important issue, and I think the combination of some quite miraculous scientific breakthroughs combined with the eye-watering costs associated actually are going to pose some big questions for us as a society, because we seem to be getting to the stage where with enough money you can cure or treat a phenomenally wide range and growing range of chronic diseases and conditions and so forth, and so we're going to have to figure this stuff out. Just at a national accounts level, are there projections for the likely costs into the future of drug budgets? So we know that treatments are becoming more advanced. We know that there are some incredibly expensive ones. They don't all have to be orphan drugs. Some of them are orphan drugs. Some of them are new treatments where they, you know, as is explained to me, kind of turbocharge your own blood, stick it back into you, and, you know, let your own immune system heal you and so forth. Are there projections for the kind of money that Ireland would need to be spending, say, in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, relative to what we're spending now, to basically provide access to Irish citizens to this emerging world of orphan drugs and breakthrough therapies?
I'm not aware that there are, and I'd imagine it's quite flexible. One of the, I suppose, the problems looking to the future are the unknowns, and as you mentioned, these new CAR T-cell therapies for cancer, they're being initially designed to treat a limited number of conditions, particularly leukemias and certain forms of lymphoma. But the expectation is that as the research continues, that the indications will expand and it will be able to treat more common drugs, conditions like breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer. And of course, if the price tag of $475,000 attaches to all of those conditions, you could be looking at the sky's the limit as to how much money you could effectively spend on these drugs. Okay,
thank you. One of the areas you seem to be looking at is what strikes me as a governmental equivalent to what the Gates Foundation did. So when they were trying to encourage large pharma to develop medicines for developing countries, there just wasn't an economic model, so the Gates Foundation put up a prize which you gain access to, and therefore it sort of tips it over into commercially viable to actually do the research in the first place. Is that essentially one of the things you're suggesting that Ireland would contribute to? And is the scale that's required for that sort of prize something that Ireland could do on its own, or really would we need to be doing it at an EU level?
Be doing it at an EU level and even at global level. I mean, one of the advantages that there's two issues. One is the amount of the money we would spend. Now, I have to say we wouldn't be spending any more money than we're spending at the moment. I think we spend over globally over €1 trillion spent on gloves, on drugs, and but we're spending it at the end. But our model would be you would spend it earlier on, and you'd get far more money, and you'd have far more control over your investment. The other issue is that we do need we need to parallel the industry in that they are global industries, and unfortunately the global political structures aren't as strong as the global pharmaceutical structures, and they need to be developed. So it certainly needs to be at EU level and probably at a UN and WHO and WTO level as well.
Is the EU doing any of it?
Yes, I think with Horizon Europe, they have explored the alternative funding, and there have been some.
There's other initiatives. There's a coalition for epidemic preparedness. That's like developing vaccines and diagnostics for potential upcoming epidemics. And one big thing they're working on in the EU at the moment is just, and with civil society, is just making sure that the results, this is publicly funded research, and at the end, the results will be available and accessible to the public, and it won't be immediately privatised to something that we can't afford. So I think that's really important. We're already spending a lot of money in Europe on research and development, so we just need to make sure that we need insurances that we will have access at the end. Yeah.
Are there any EU prize funds to? So there's many different ways you can do it. One way you can do it is we can just do it ourselves, right? We can publicly fund universities or research centres or whatever it is. And or we can create economic incentives for the private sector to do the kind of work we want them to do rather than them just chasing margin all the time. Does the EU do any of the latter?
My understanding is yes, but in small scale.
Yeah, okay. And then on the former, which is publicly funded research on drugs, most of the drugs that we see coming through or that get discussed at this committee, or all of them maybe, are from private pharma companies. Are there examples of breakthrough drugs, orphan drugs, in the last, say, 5 years that have come online that have come from public research institutes?
So, for the hepatitis C cure, Sabosvir, the majority of the funding that came from that, almost all the funding came from the National Institute of Health, so it came, and the Department for Veteran Affairs, so it came basically from the taxpayers' money, completely public funding. A pharmaceutical company, Gilead, bought over that pharmaceutical company that made it, Pharmacet, and they also bought the patent for that. So because of that, they put it at prices just too high that many people can't afford to pay. Globally, there's 71 million people living with Hep C. We know through research, at 40 billion, we will be able to eradicate Hep C from the world, and that will be...
Sorry, the question I'm asking, though, is can you give us examples of a few? So we have Spinraza, we have Orkambi. We can list private drugs. Can you give us examples of drugs that have come through public institutions and are being deployed as such, not ones that have been nobbled by private interests?
All of the FDA approved drugs between, I think, 2010 and 2016, that's about 200 drugs. They all had some component of public funding, and that's actually a huge problem, and that's something we like to talk about, is because right now there's no transparency in how much of each individual drug was publicly funded. Biogen, who makes Spinraza, they...
Sorry, I'm asking a different question.
Oh, sorry.
The question I'm asking is, have any of these drugs come out of publicly owned institutions like universities or research centres that are public research centres?
Thank you, Deputy. A group called the TB Alliance and the DNDI, which is whatever D stands for,
Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative.
That's a public-private partnership, and it's supported partially by Irish Aid, supported partially by the Gates Foundation, and there have been public-private partnerships developed in areas of neglected diseases where there's not that much huge public interest. There's not going to be great return on it, and they have developed new TB drugs. They've developed recently a very effective treatment for Chagas disease, and there's a new malaria.
And sorry, when we talk about public-private partnerships, I'm talking public, right?
Yes.
Look, what I'm basically trying to understand, here's what I'm trying to get at, right? I want to try and understand is it just the reality that the private companies have to do this, and we put in legal and financial ways of securing the IP, or are there publicly owned research infrastructure globally that can actually do this themselves, or are we reliant on the private companies to do the research, development and clinical trials, etc.?
No, certainly with the TB Alliance, it's largely, most of the funding, direct funding, came from government sources, including Irish Aid, including from DFID. They did use some of industry's expertise, but the trials were conducted largely by Medicines Sans Frontières. So the bulk of the work was done entirely with public support, with some assistance from industry. But certainly industry were not the major players, and they were advising and assisting as opposed to directing and taking ownership of the project.
So the research, the R&D, was being done by publicly employed scientists.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Great. In terms of the IP protection, the patent at 20 years, is there a recommendation as to what that should be brought down to?
Well, I suppose our position would be that patent and monopoly-induced incentives are not appropriate. That it's not appropriate for any period of time that the owner of a life-saving drug should be allowed to charge what they want. Clearly, there does need to be some incentive, but that's not an appropriate one. We do realise that it's used as an incentive, and particularly for orphan drugs, the incentive, there's even an added 10 years on top of that. But our position would be that patents and monopoly and market exclusivity is not an appropriate incentive for developing drugs.
Okay, so if we are, it sounds like we are largely reliant on the private sector to do the work. I know you were able to reference one PPP, but it sounds like really the private sector is going to do the vast majority of the work here. If you remove IP, if you remove the ability of them for a time-limited period to charge a healthy margin, have you another model, because they still need to follow the money?
Yes.
Have you another model whereby they can still make a profit. Otherwise, they're just not going to do the
Sure.
work.
We think this should be funded, that the research should be funded directly by governments. I suppose it's a bit like tolling roads. You can either pay somebody to build the road up front, or you can say, well, you build the road and then charge the tolls for 20 or 30 years. And our belief is that it's the upfront direction of governments is the more appropriate and cost efficient, and will bring the greatest public health benefit for a given amount of money.
So, let's say you're a global pharmaco, and the Irish government, or at an EU level, we decide we're going to target lung cancer.
Yes.
So a blockbuster, now I haven't looked at these figures in a while, but 10 years ago, the R&D cost for a typical blockbuster drug was about $5 billion US. Right? I imagine it's gone up considerably. That was about 10 years ago. So is the proposal then that you would create EU funds where you would hand Pfizer or GSK or whoever it is, say 5, 10, 20 billion US dollars, and say, can you develop us drugs for the following diseases?
Well, I suppose two things. One is, I suppose the problem is transparency. Nobody actually knows how much it costs to develop a new drug. Pharma will say 5 billion. I think most people would say that's probably on the top end of it, and that in fact the prices is more between 1 and 2 billion. And the private-public partnerships that we mentioned earlier, they developed very effective new drugs for $500,000.
$500 million.
$500 million, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. But regardless what it is, let's say somewhere between 1 billion and 5 billion. Is the idea that we would block grant the pharmacos?
It would need to be done in a number of fashions. It would probably be pull-push mechanisms. So one would decide, okay, this is the amount of money, this is what we want developed, this is the amount of money we've got, and then decisions would have to be made as to whether or not there would be a competition to put out to tender with people, whether it would be done all in one blockbuster. Would people have to break down the research, and some people you would compete for certain forms of research, or you could decide, and it may also be decided to have reward people after the product is produced, and if the product is seen to be affordable. There's not much point in developing a very expensive product to discover that actually, or a very effective product to discover that it's so expensive that nobody can afford it afterwards. So there's a number of models and a number of ways of doing it differently.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yep, thank you all very much. Deputy Louise O'Reilly.
Thanks very much, and thanks for coming in and for your presentation. So, in your presentation, you say that the current R&D model is unsuitable and that it has the potential to bankrupt the healthcare system while failing to advance public health. So it's very hard to disagree with that. And I suppose the purpose of our questions here this morning are to try and scope out what potential there is to move away from where we are. Because as politicians, and I fully appreciate nobody has any sympathy for politicians and we probably don't deserve much, but we end up stuck in the middle. Most of us are not medical professionals, some of us are, but most of us aren't, and we get stuck in between the funding and the families and the pharmaceutical industry, and that's not a very comfortable place for us to be at all. And the current system is entirely, from my experience of it, is entirely set up nearly to encourage that, and you find yourself in a situation whereby you want to do right by the families. The pharmaceutical companies say they have to make a profit, otherwise they will leave. Now, I don't know how they balance that also with what they say in relation to caring about everyone, but anyway, notwithstanding that, I think we are all agreed, however, whatever the solutions we might have, is that the current system is just not working. It's not delivering for families. And as I said, not that people will have much sympathy for us, but it certainly puts us in an unpleasant situation sometimes. Can I just ask, with regard to public money, have you an idea how much money the Irish government spends or invests in R&D for medicines? And does that funding come with any obligations? So where we see, and I would have in my previous life represented people in the education sector, and you see these fantastic institutes being built, and they generally have a recognisable brand name on the side of them, or there's some form of sponsorship that goes on. But when we would have probed what exactly the world of medicine was getting back, as opposed to the company itself, they seem to get a lot in terms of labour, etc. So I'm just wondering, how much do they spend, and is there a protocol for what comes back as a result of that? And can you give us any examples of good practice in relation to the public return on public investment, because it seems that we don't have the capacity. We have the capacity to invest and to subsidise it, but we don't have the capacity to prioritise it.
Thank you, O'Reilly. Dr. Harkin.
A PQ on that, on the issue of Irish investment in research and development was put down earlier this year, and the response was over 100,000 euro was invested directly for. Over 100 million. Sorry, was invested directly, but it was also commented that there were other expenses that were such as tax relief and tax benefits that were more difficult to measure, and so we don't have an estimate on how much there is over and above the 100 million, but certainly there were significant amounts.
There's also the 25% R&D tax credit, which could be construed as indirect public funding. And in terms of return on investment, we don't actually measure it as far as I know, but all the kind of R&D money that's invested in Ireland, it seems to be measured kind of based on the uptake from industry, as opposed to like the public health, that it's the good that it's done in terms of that. So that's kind of what we do.
And with regard to the examples of good practice, can you point to anywhere where they may have got this right that we could, copy of them?
Some places are getting there. There's a big campaign among universities to kind of be very socially responsible in how they license their products and the patents that they take out. And I think that's really something important to look into. Just, if you are the beneficiary of public funding, that you would commit to making it affordable, available at the end, having some price control at the end.
That's where we need to get to, is getting whatever it is we're putting in, that we have some influence, A, over what direction the research takes, and B, over the eventual cost. The Drugs for Neglected Diseases initiative, it's been mentioned already. Do you think that that's something that could be scaled up? My understanding is it has yielded some decent results, but I'm just wondering if you think it has the potential to be scaled up.
Yeah, I think that's what all the recommendations are saying. It's kind of going that way in Europe. Like, a lot of people are talking about this. It's not just us. The UN, they had a higher level panel on access to medicines, and they recommended, a global pooled research fund in which we would contribute and then have control over the products at the end. So I think there are initiatives, it's heading that way in Europe. This is being talked about, and this is something we need to do in order to get the medicines that we need at the right price. Okay. Yeah.
And my last question is just in relation to clinical trials. So, do you think that there's anything the government could be doing to ensure that the clinical trial process is more transparent? So, do we know if all of the clinical trial results that are produced here, do we know how many of them are publicly funded? Are all of them publicly funded? Are they all published? Is that info? Because I'm conscious that there is an effective subsidy in place in some instances for these clinical trials, but that doesn't extend to necessarily sharing all of the information. And is there anything that we can do, either by way of a recommendation as a committee or as legislators or parliamentarians, any measures that we can do that can improve the transparency in particular in relation to clinical trials, but even just to get a handle on how many are here, how many are publicly funded, and what happens to the results?
I'm not sure whether that was a recommendation or a question.
Just to see, is there anything we can do to improve on it?
No, absolutely. I mean, there is a real problem. Traditionally, there's been a real problem with research that's been conducted by industry or indeed by other people, in that research which produces favourable results is published, and research which doesn't produce favourable results it tends not to be published. And so you get a skewing of evidence, and people look and say, oh, this seems to be really good, forgetting about the fact that there's lots of unpublished information. And there is now EU legislation, I'm not sure whether it's across the line or not, but which insists that any reports, any clinical trials which are conducted and initiated must have the results published within 12 months of completion, regardless of the outcome. And I do know that some of the medical journals now will not report upon clinical trials unless they have been registered before the trial
So the industry is effectively, the area is effectively policing itself in that regard.
I think that the problem is that while there is some legislation has been passed at the EU level, it is more observed in the breach, and that I think I read something during the week about 40% of trials conducted in the UK are published and 60% are not. So it still is very much a problem, and this is certainly something. I don't have figures for Ireland, but it should be relatively easy to get figures in Ireland for a number of studies that are registered and then reported upon.
And just one final question. We all have read this, and I'm not sure how true or untrue it is, and maybe you can confirm it for us, that most global pharmaceuticals will spend more on advertising than they do on research and development. And if that's the case, then it undermines a lot of what is said in the public discourse, because these debates get very heated. You're talking about seriously ill people and seriously ill children in some instances, and the retort from the pharmaceutical companies is they have to make back what they have spent in R&D. But if it's true, and I suspect it is, that they spend more on advertising than they do on R&D, that sort of undermines their claims a little bit. So I don't know if you will be aware whether or not that is true. It's something I have heard, but
we have references for that, and as well, Knowledge Ecology International, they did a study in 2010 which showed that of the percentage of global sales, the sales of the pharmaceutical company, only about 7% was spent back on R&D. So just wherever the other 93% went,
Would you imagine it goes on advertising, or?
Not all on advertising.
No, but a good chunk of it.
Yeah.
So, all right, thank you.
Thank you. If I could just add to that, it is absolutely true. It is almost twice as much. And the irony is that they spend much more. Is that the less useful a drug is, the more money they have to spend marketing it. A good drug will sell itself without need to expensively to court doctors in particular to try and persuade them to prescribe the drugs.
But not only marketing is the issue, we know that they're spending vast amounts of money on share buybacks. So in the People's Prescription and the reports, for an example, we've seen the last 10 years, Pfizer spent $139 billion on share buybacks and dividends compared to $82 billion on research and development. And that's not including marketing as well.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, Deputy Durkan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our guests for coming before us this morning and give us the benefit of their advice. I agree, in fact, with the views you have expressed that it is totally unworkable. It is morally wrong what's happening at the present time, whereby people who are seriously ill know that a particular drug is available and has beneficial effect for them, and are deprived from so doing unless they pay a ransom for it. I think that is morally wrong, and I don't think that should be. I think we have come to a situation where I think the pharma sector has to be regulated in some fashion. I think the best place to do that is at European level. I've said this many times in the past, Mr. Chairman. I don't think any one country can deal with this themselves. And I appreciate what the pharmaceutical sector does. It does tremendous work. It does very important work in terms of research and development. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the drugs at all. And it's hugely beneficial. But having said all that and done all that, there comes a time then when the patient shouldn't become the victim. And the patient is being told, well, if you have enough money, you can have this drug now, or we will test it with you first on a trial, and when it's proven to be very effective, we now up the price. That is morally wrong, and that cannot be allowed to continue. We have the system. We've talked about this many times in this committee. And I feel that some means has to be found at European level, because it's not going to work at national level, because no one country, not even the more powerful countries, are prepared to do it. There are drugs that are not reimbursed in the UK, for example, at the present time, because they're too expensive, but they are effective. So it's so sad to see the patients being held up to ransom when a remedy is readily available, an effective remedy is readily available. And at the same time, governments are being then told, you pay up or you don't get the drug. So I suggest, and I don't know how we can do this, but I believe we have to do it through the European Union. I think we have to use the power of the numbers, the market, the European market, the single market, to impress upon the pharmaceutical sector. You know, fair is fair. We're prepared to go a certain distance, and we know that you've invested, and taking into account the cost of the investment and so on, research and development. But at the end of the day, fair is fair to the patient as well. And having developed the facilities that you do, we now think that it is time that the patient at least got an even break, and that we don't have a system whereby only the very wealthy can afford to live. And that's really a stark and sad situation. So I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that I'm not asking for a response to this. I've said this many times before. But obviously, like a response as well. But I think we have to go back to our colleagues in the European Union and in an effort to encourage them to deal with what's happening and to deal with it throughout the European Union, and we will all have the benefit of it.
Thank you. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I think we need to show our colleagues in Europe kind of a good example as well, and we can, be a leading light on this. We could shine a light on what's happening in Ireland and at EU level. Other governments' health committees have, compiled reports and made policy commitments in this area. So I do think there are commitments we can make at a domestic level. Obviously, at an EU level, we'd be very keen that Ireland would support the Italian resolution on transparency, for example, at the World Health Association. But there's also domestic measures we can take on building transparency as well around pharmaceutical prices, how they're reached. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add.
If I could just comment, and thank you very much, Deputy Durkan. I would agree with everything you said. I think probably there are, and you're right, it is more difficult at a national level to see what to do. But the Dutch have recently produced, they commissioned a report to see what they could do at a local level. And one of the interesting things, they come up with a number of interesting things, but one of the interesting things they come up with, they discovered they were actually funding research, and just at the point when it might become commercially available, it was being handed over and industry were taking it for a song. But that in fact, if you invested just a little bit more, just went one step further in the research to package it up so that it was viable on a commercial market, you get much more value for money. And they also have put in clause that for research that the report was recommending that there should be a subsequent public input into price control down the line on research that was developed using government. So I do think this committee might usefully explore some options that we could use at a national level to reform the system.
I think, Chairman, yes. I think it's limited what we can do at national level. We've tried it before, and I used to be on a health board once upon a time when we tried it as well, and it wasn't very successful. But the problem is this: there are 500 million people in the European Union, and they are the answer to the problem, as I see it. They're a powerful market that have huge influence. Their pocketbooks are important. And right across the board, they can influence policy in a way that nobody else can. And like 5 million people may well have a say in these issues, but 500 million people have a bigger say, and we have to be realistic. And I've said this many times before, Chairman. We are members of the European Union. We don't always get the full benefits that we're entitled to from membership of the European Union. In such issues as this, it's deemed to be a fringe issue. It's not seen to be a core issue for the point of every citizen in the Union. But the fact of the matter is, it is a core issue. It is an issue that can affect the lives, and totally affect the lives of many, many families throughout the country. And we've seen it every day. There are totally unrealistic prices being sought for treatments at the present time. And that's morally wrong that we should be in that kind of situation. And at the same time being part of the European Union. So I go back to what I said before, we need to check with our European colleagues as to what the prices are in all of our member states. And there's no good saying that we select a number of states, as we have done in the past, 12 or 13 states, in which we will take an average and we'll use that as the benchmarker. I don't think that's acceptable either. I think people are people and the same values and the same entitlements all over Europe, and we need to assert ourselves in that one.
Thank you, Deputy Durkan. Now, Deputy John Brazel.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, witnesses, for coming in. From what I can gather, Access to Medicines Ireland, you're a group of concerned medical professionals trying to do something about the spiralling costs of drugs, and your focus seems to be on the companies that produce these drugs and the R&D element around that. So, do you have any idea, or is it available, the cost of developing a drug from a molecule to a product that's available on the shelf, and then an ability to work back from that to see what governments could do? And I might be speaking for myself now, but maybe I understand that what you would like to see is that governments would invest in the R&D, and then the company, for that investment, when they do make the breakthrough, instead of charging 500,000 per treatment, would be charging 50,000 per treatment, and the payback is that the investment is made up front. So I'd be, if that's my, I mean, you know, correct me if I'm not understanding what you're trying to do or what you're trying to achieve, but if that is the model, what sort of investment would, because this is a global, like, we all want to try and achieve something, you know, and at the end of the day, Deputy O'Reilly pointed out that where we sit, like last week we had the people who were suffering from Spinraza or from spinal muscular atrophy in with us, trying to get Spinraza over the line. The Benelux model, which you welcome, is mentioned. To my knowledge, Spinraza is available in the other three, not here. And, you know, so how do we square or explain that one away? And, you know, I just, maybe we start with that anyway and see what you have to offer on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. The UN high-level panel addressed the issue of how much it costs to produce a drug, and they quoted, there's a number of sources. Part of the problem is a lack of transparency, and industry intentionally refused to publish the detail they say is commercial sensitivity. But having said that, there is a range of estimates ranging from 150,000 to
50 million.
150, no, actually it was 150,000. It was actually less. That was one of the smaller drugs. It depends on the kind of drug you're trying to produce, up to, and I think the latest one, a report there, was 4 billion, which was quoted by Forbes, but which is a figure produced by industry itself. Now, few people outside of industry would agree with the figure of 4 billion and would say it's closer to about 2 billion. So the estimate is in around 2 billion will fund you a pretty good drug.
I just would like to answer kind of what you said about Benelux and the initiative. Yeah, and you're completely right. So Belgium and the Netherlands have negotiated a deal for Spinraza, and Ireland still doesn't have it. And I think that is something actually really important that we can do at national level, is if we're going to be part of Benelux, that we need to avoid tokenism, you know, just to say that we're doing something, we're part of this initiative, you know, and the strength of that collaboration will depend on each country's commitment to it. If one country decides, oh, we can actually get a better deal, you know, we're going to go it alone, then that undermines the whole agreement, and that's exactly what the industry will want. And, you know, we still don't know. It all goes back to transparency. We still don't know how much Belgium and the Netherlands are paying for the drug. That's confidential, and that really, really puts us on the back foot when we're trying to negotiate as a country ourselves. You know, we're a small market. The company is aware of that. You know, they've already got 1.7 billion in global sales. So, you know, we have to commit, and we have to be accountable for our participation in Benelux. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Biogen, and as you mentioned them, I'm not sure the remuneration of the CEO, you know. Yeah, is that? I mean, companies will argue that they do have a public health interest. I suppose they have to have in order to.
But they would rather, we have a small market in Ireland, they would rather lose that market, they're already making enough in sales, than offer it to this country at a price that is affordable. So they are putting their own profits above the patients, the children's lives with spinal muscular atrophy in Ireland. They are.
Okay, well, they would tell us as politicians that the price available in Ireland is equivocal to the deal that they get with Belgium and the Netherlands. So, yeah. who do we? You know, and I think transparency might be the key to all this. If we could unlock transparency, then we might make progress. But I just question, you know, somebody with a limited amount of knowledge in the industry. Is there ever going to be a scenario whereby world governments will, on a multilateral basis, will unite and combine and say we're going to invest what is X percentage of our health budget in R&D, and we're going to give it to the various companies to do it, and then invest ourselves, and then for that they are going to have a payback model when the drug comes to fruition? Is that something that's achievable?
Can I, if I may answer that? Yes, I think it is achievable, and I think we're already seeing it happening within the area of antimicrobial resistance. This is an area that doesn't hold much commercial attractiveness for drug companies. The reason being that if you develop a new antibiotic, you have to use it sparingly, and you have to be very selective in where you use it. And the last thing you want to do is having drug reps going around knocking on every GP surgery saying use this for this, that, and the other. So there's very little. So once you develop the drug, you have to kind of hold it close to your chest and make sure that it's so nobody's interested in it. There's been no. I don't think there's been any new antibiotics developed in the last 15 years. I may be corrected, but there's been very little, and many drug companies have simply declared that they're not even researching new antibiotics. So this is an area that's open, and the WHO and the UN have now got a forum of intergovernmental forum looking at how to develop new antibiotics, and when they are developed, how to actually distribute them. Clearly, there's no conflict. This is because there's no conflict of interest between pharma's interests and public health. The other thing I just to say about pharma, you know, it's not a good thing or a bad thing, but their remit is then the responsibility is to their shareholder. They don't have a remit to public health, and in fact, any CEO who goes out of their way to try and to jeopardise profit at the expense to jeopardise profit to gain public health will be found. He'll be fired fairly soon. Their sole responsibility, and now obviously to be effective as a company, they do have to be seen in some or other to have products that are useful and that can contribute to public health. But their remit is not public health. Their remit is to make money. And I'm sure we are all aware around the table that this is the case. And that ties into the fact that when they're setting the price of a drug that's being set, there's no relationship to how much it costs to bring it to market. Even if you did know how much it costs to bring a drug to market, they would still say, well, actually, we're going to charge you, you know, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, you know, whatever we think. It's like playing poker. And these guys said, well, I think this guy's got money, and this guy's desperate enough, and so they'll pay. And that's how the price is determined at the moment. So as long as we've got a model that allows the manufacturer of a drug to charge what they like, then, you know, we are going to be paying more than we can afford. By definition, that we're going to be squeezed as much as we can bear.
And just lastly, in your presentation, I can't find the exact wording now, but you're suggesting that public funds currently are used in pharmaceutical research.
Yeah.
Could you just explain that one to me, just so that I understand where that happens and how it happens?
A lot of the research, particularly a lot of the early research done in universities, which is funded publicly, and again, the UN, a number of reports have documented that 30% of R&D overall is funded globally, and that's put down at 240 billion, I think, in 2015. It was from the public purse went in towards research.
And your contention is that when that research results in a drug being developed, the research element of it isn't reimbursed.
Absolutely.
Or isn't reimbursed in the same proportion that it
It's
should
not
be.
reimbursed, and nor has the person who put the money up front got any input into price or transparency. You can say, how much did it cost, where did the funding come? You're told, well, actually, thanks very much, but this is our concern, and you've got no more. The fund has got absolutely no rights once the product is passed on.
Sorry, are drug companies giving universities money towards research, and then sort of feel the university feels that they're beholding to the company, and is that going on?
Yes, it is a symbiotic relationship. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy President. Deputy O'Connell.
And thank you all for coming in, giving your time to us, and for all you're doing, especially you, Mr. Lawler. It's very important to have patients that are out there advocating for others. Just to follow on from my colleague Deputy Durkan's comments on the EU, I have to agree. I think that the solution here is the EU market, the 500 million people, that we are being played off against each other as such, and when it comes to drug pricing. And then following on from Deputy Brazel, in the case of Spinraza, which I believe perhaps has gone through the Benelux A agreement, then we're told, well, that's the price, but that's not the real price, because the list price and the actual price are different, and this is commercially sensitive, etc., etc. So, you know, the transparency is clearly a big issue here, and we seem to spend so much time dancing around and protecting farmers' confidentiality, when in actual fact we have people, as I'm sure the medics are aware, suffering daily due to lack of access to drugs. I would be very supportive of centralised assessment in terms of the EU. We are essentially the same body of people, and therefore, and with the same rules as such. So I cannot understand why each country is running these through their individual national, whatever, there's pharmacoeconomics, that their individual countries. So I do think that that's the way we have to move. In terms of the market, and just, I suppose, when a company brings out or goes to propose a drug, they already know their market. They already know how many people have HIV or have hepatitis or have a particular rare condition, or cystic fibrosis, for example. So it's not like, and I am a pharmacist, but I mean, I think we'd be very, very conscious of the remit of pharmaceutical companies is to their shareholders and not to public health. And I think as legislators, it's where I suppose the concern arises, because what I've seen in here over the last few years is, if you get a good PR company, if you get a good story, if you get the right victims of a condition, that you end up in a situation where, as I'm sure as medics, it is very concerning that those who shout the loudest often get the most. And it's a huge injustice there. So just for example, you have 2 children with debilitating physical illness. One, a drug comes out, and one, there's no drug. By the power of pharma, the child to which the drug has been developed for, that child perhaps could get €500,000 a year in drug treatment. The child that there's no drug developed for gets nothing. And that is a huge inequality, and I find it as a medical professional very, very difficult, and as legislator, and I'm sure that's probably why you're here today, the injustice that we see. In terms of how do we move forward on this? There's a lot of people speak about ring fencing of budgets. Now, I always find, and perhaps some of you could tell me if I'm wrong, that if you ring fence, it's a target rather than a bill. So if let's say we say we'll give €100 towards biosimilars, of just arbitrary figure, or to orphan drugs, we will always ending up at €11. So the ring fencing I am concerned about, because once the money's gone, if the money's gone in March, companies will ramp up their production of drugs to come onto the market in January, so the fellow who's coming out with his drug in June will never see the light of day, and the patients will suffer. So personally, I'm concerned about the ring fencing model. In terms of where we are and in your opening statement you referenced generic substitution and reference pricing, and I have lived through that phase as a pharmacist. biosimilars pose similar opportunities to generics that generics did 15 years ago. I understand that when pharmacists were to generically substitute, we brought in a piece of legislation here. There is huge pushback in terms of biosimilar substitution from various places, the usual suspects. And perhaps if one of the doctors could give their opinion on, if you have any data on, if we substitute the top 10 rare disease drugs or high-tech drugs with biosimilars, perhaps have you any costings on what sort of savings? Because every time we give out a branded high-tech product that there is a biosimilar sitting on the shelf, there is somebody else not getting a treatment as a result. And I'm aware in the Netherlands that they're using these all of the time. I met with a pharmacist from the Netherlands the other night, and we seem to be behind the curve here. And perhaps if you think there's a reason for the delay in this, would it be, or would I be just sceptical in that the position of Big Pharma in Ireland might have something to do with our slow progress in this regard? Just back to the market again. Like, there is definitely a move in the pharmaceutical industry to pick not the massive population illnesses such as cholesterol, and not the very, very rare conditions where they're 5. They pick a market where they do the sum. They go, there's 3,000 children or adults with this condition. They multiply it up. They have their top price. They cut off 40%. They know that's the lowest point to go. So this is all, to some extent, a game. But the game is causing lives and leaving people without medication. So I think it's high time we stood up to them. They want to sell drugs. We want to buy drugs. But we are in a position where we have limited and finite resources. In terms of the access to meds in the developing world, and quite interested in this in terms of vaccination, and in terms of HIV control and hepatitis C eradication. I've seen some data recently that in the developed world, where we have been exposed, and I'm talking about Ireland and Europe, when we're exposed to fake news or incorrect information on vaccination, in general, such is our belief system in public health, that many Irish people are able to look at the information, realise that it is perhaps not as it seems, and make their own informed decision. Well, I've seen evidence from developing countries that if people use the internet as their only source of medical information, and they haven't had the basis of an education system and a public health system, where you develop critical thought, where you believe the GP, you've met the hospital doctor, you've heard about things in the news. If your only source of news is social media, with regard to vaccinations, hepatitis C or HIV, that you can often be a really, really good target for people trying to affect global vaccination rates for whatever their reason is. So if you have any information on that sort of bias and the challenges in terms of the developing world and how we protect those people so that perhaps if there's public vaccination programs being funded, it's absolutely pointless if the herd immunity isn't reached. It's a complete waste of time. So if you have any information on that, I would be interested to hear it. And just finally, very, very interesting, that antibiotic resistance piece, Dr. Harkins. I never even considered it before, that there's just no money in antibiotics, and there's no money in developing a drug that you don't want to use and you want to restrict the use of. And I think I'd be interested to hear if you have any more information on that, or if you could perhaps send it to me after the committee. It's something that I am quite concerned about, because we can have all the vaccination programmes and HIV eradication, but if we've a super resistant bug, that's the end of us all anyway, so there's no point about the rest of it. So if you could perhaps elaborate on that. And if actually in terms of the antibiotic resistance, I read one of the documents, there's a movement now with One Health in terms of the way antibiotic use in the human population and in the animal population and in the environment, that obviously if I eat an antibiotic and I excrete X amount of it and it enters the water supply, and then if you've farmers putting bulk powder antibiotics into especially pig and chicken feed, totally unrestricted, no VAT, we're not charging any VAT on it either, but it's another day's work. But in terms of overuse of antibiotics in the animal world or in the veterinary world, combined with restrictions in the human world, and it all going into the environment, which is what we're all talking about right now. If you have any research on that or any view you'd like to tell the committee, I think it might be of value today. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy O'Connell. Dr. Harkin.
Thank you. As I just addressed the first 2 points you raised, I think it's really interesting about we've done a lot of research, and there's been a lot of research into the cost effectiveness of certain drugs, but there's been much less research into the cost effectiveness of other interventions, such as what's the cost effectiveness of a home help, what's the cost effectiveness of physiotherapy or speech therapy, and these things are not, and particularly when you look at the context of a limited health budget, and a new drug comes in, and you whip out, 2 or 3 million, and other bits are put aside. And I think we need probably to broaden our concept and stop just thinking about how much do drugs cost, but think of how much do interventions cost, how much, is it, and there's other areas I'm sure we're overspending, and maybe MRI scans, I'm not sure, but I think we need to probably have a broader look at the cost effectiveness of all health interventions, and it might make us think twice again before we spend huge amounts of money on a particular drug of limited efficiency. But if everybody realises that this is actually a specific cost of something else, could be much more useful. And I did read in the Sunday Business Post last Sunday about the I suppose really about the relatively low rate of generic prescribing amongst doctors and
biosimilars.
For biosimilars, yes, for biosimilars, that there's an over-reliance on the brand leader, and there's very limited clinical evidence, that the clinical reason why one shouldn't. It would seem that's something that ought to change, and I see that Dr. Barry is, from the NCP has said he will go about it.
Yeah, I think he's talking about, changing or proposing legislation where you would have to, unless you had a really good reason, you would have to prescribe the biosimilar. And yeah, he's spoken about it publicly that, our biosimilar use for adalimumab, I think, is 2% of the market volume, whereas in Sweden it was 80%. So it's definitely one aspect of the problem with our drugs budget for sure. And it's probably not all to do with the presence of pharma industries. Probably, clinicians need to be educated, patients need to be educated, about the safety of the drug, and that it will be equivalent to what they're currently on, and that fear needs to be taken away for sure. But it's not, I suppose, it's Michael Barry, he's very expert on this and will probably speak to that. And I'd like to say, I really agree kind of with everything you said there, but particularly about ring fencing budgets for, like orphan drugs and rare drugs. I suppose it's a way in the short term to get things quickly onto the market, but it won't provide any incentives for industry to lower the price. Prices may even go up in that setting. Yeah.
I'd like to talk to you, Kate. Thanks very much for your very strong words, and I am delighted that you brought up the developing world, lower and middle income countries, because we also have to recognise that we're talking a lot about Ireland and our issues here, but we can see these policies can have very far-reaching effects. I'll talk about HIV a little bit because that's where I work in. We know, thankfully, that because of generic HIV medication, uptake of HIV meds from $10,000 is around 9–10% of the world population. Now it's up to 53% of the world population, which is brilliant, thanks to generic. However, that's still 47% of the population who do not have access to HIV treatment. We know treatment stops AIDS-related deaths and also stops the transmission of HIV, but we're not there, and one of the main reasons is still cause the high cost of drugs. Also, on my 5th option of HIV medication, if you're in Uganda, you have only access to 2. I would be dead if I was born in a lower or middle income country. We only have access to 2. So the real question here is, why do we put more value on my life than all my friends in Uganda? And that's currently the system here. So I'm so delighted that you did bring up the developing and lower middle income world and their issues, because this can have far-reaching effects, and I think we really need to understand that. In terms of education, initially there was a slow uptake of antiretroviral therapy, because a lot of people at the time were uneducated and they thought they could be healed by the power of God, or they thought that HIV was made up by the CIA in America. There's a lot of conspiracy theories which can go rife in a lot of these countries that don't have education. But thanks to Irish Aid, who pumped so much money into community representations, education programs, we have seen a far-reaching uptake of antiretrovirals. This is a model that works, and this is a model that needs to be brought forward in the cases of vaccinations. But also, they're not reducing the price of vaccinations by the price of $5, which could obviously, MSF have done lots of reports on this as well. For a small reduction, we can see a massive uptake in vaccinations for the vast majority of people who actually want them as well. So yes, I guess my take on all of this is, yes, think about Ireland, what we can do at EU level, but let's not forget those whose voices aren't being heard on the global stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before we go around to our second round of speakers, from what I can gather this morning, the tension is between the pharmaceutical industry, which is a commercial entity driven by profit, responsibility to their shareholders, and health services, which have limited budgets, and their responsibility is to their population and their patients. So that's where the negotiation starts. And the EU Council has stated that it's within the competency of each country to decide what drugs they approve and what drugs they don't approve, and what costs they pay for them. So are we being played and exploited by pharmaceutical companies who play one country against the other? Because we have seen groups coming into the Dáil saying this drug is available in several 10, 20 countries around Europe. Why is it not available here in Ireland? So there is a moral pressure applied to governments and a moral pressure applied to politicians, and we are all subject to lobbying from Big Pharma in relation to making particularly orphan drugs for rare and ultra-rare diseases available. And we have presentations in the AV room, most recently Spinraza, but for many other drugs. So the moral pressure is applied to government and to politicians, but the same moral pressure doesn't seem to be applied to the pharmaceutical industry, which obviously should have a moral and ethical responsibility, if they have a drug which is effective, to withhold it on the basis of an exorbitant cost. It does have a moral and ethical responsibility, but the spotlight is not shone on the company, and many of the representative groups don't go to the pharmaceutical headquarters and make a presentation there. They come here to put the moral pressure on the government and politicians to pay. So there should be a rebalancing of that, and perhaps you might comment on that. I know the Irish Pharmaceutical Healthcare Association would contend that they negotiate prices with the government on a regular basis, and there was an expectation from them that the cost reduction that they negotiated, I think it was in 2016, would be redeployed into the approval of new drugs as they come on the market. And they would contend that Ireland is way below the European average in approving new drugs. I think of 153 drugs that they would speak of, Ireland has approved 49. Maybe that has increased in the past few months. But there's an expectation from the pharmaceutical industry that savings that are generated from either using generics or negotiating cost price reductions should be ploughed back into new drugs. And they would contend that that's not happening. So you might comment on that. And there's two issues, the issue of existing drugs and how you can reduce the cost of existing drugs. And we're all familiar with people who will go to Spain or Portugal and they can buy X, Y and Z across the counter for a fraction of the price that they can get that drug here. So obviously there is a variation in cost, and are we not using our power as a member of the European Union to get other European states to negotiate a common price across Europe. Why should a drug in Spain cost a fraction of what it costs here? Then finally, there are the orphan drugs and the new cancer drugs, drugs for hepatitis C that are coming on the market all the time. And how can a country like Ireland, a small country, negotiate a price with a global pharmaceutical company? Surely, as Deputy Durkan has said, we should be using our power within Europe to have a common price across Europe. So perhaps you might comment on those points.
I'd like to comment on the first one because I work with many patient organisation groups myself in terms of putting the moral spotlight on pharmaceutical industries. And we have a real problem, not only in Ireland but across the globe, of pitting patient groups against each other. So we're not paying for your pre-exposure or your prophylaxis for getting HIV because it's taking cancer drugs from babies. You know, and this is what we see within the media. We're pitting each other, even though we're all just trying to get the best healthcare for ourselves, and which we all have moral obligation and human right to have. But also, the anger can be towards yourselves, the parliamentaries, as you know, but also now we've seen in the NCP process. And I think it's a large part of our work as a civil society organisation to really communicate with the public, to redirect our anger to something that's productive also. And that's not, why isn't the HSE paying for these highly overpriced drugs? And ask the question, the fundamental question, why are we allowing the drugs to be so expensive in the first place? And I think if we can have the society to ask that fundamental question, well, then we can redirect our efforts elsewhere. So I do think that all stakeholders in the drug pricing paradigm really need to come together to change how can we ask that fundamental question.
Thank you.
My understanding, again, it's not actually within our area of expertise, but is the agreement that the state had with the pharmaceutical industry that savings from generics will be used to prescribe new drugs. But my understanding is two things. One is that all of that budget has been used up already. That Michael Barry said that almost all of the savings due for new drugs has been used up by the end of February. And the other thing is that in previous years, that when it was decided to actually to approve reimbursement for Orkambi, that took a huge chunk. I don't know the figures, but a substantial amount of the monies that had been penciled in to be used for new drugs was actually taken up by that one drug alone.
And we don't have that much clarity on whether those savings from 2016, well, I haven't seen evidence that those savings have happened. You know, like a budget analysis of, you know, how much money that was and where it's being used now. I'm quoting Dominic Coyle's article from the Irish Times recently, who mentioned that there wasn't clarity on that.
Well, I presume countries would defend their right to decide what drugs are available and what price they pay. But surely there must be a benefit in a common negotiating policy where one country is not played against the other.
Yes.
And that seems to be what's happening.
Yes.
And each country has a different price for the same drug.
Yes.
So it depends on what the market will bear. So
absolutely.
Is there any movement in Europe that looks at this from that moral perspective and decides that we should now have a united and common negotiating strategy, rather than each individual country adopting their own negotiating strategy, which seems to be a weakness?
I think it was envisaged that Benelux would be such a group, and Valletta, which is another organisation of southern European countries, would perform that function. And it's been really disappointing that they haven't. That I think Belgium and the Netherlands, one decided to participate, to approve Spinraza, and the other not, and it's been really disappointing. But we would say it's still very early days. It's a difficult process, and that the hope still rests within organisations, within the development of groups such as Benelux and Valletta.
Thank you. Deputy O'Reilly?
Yeah, it's interesting that you would hold out the hopes for Benelux, because I think it's important that would deliver. But just, and this is my final question on this, outside of our roles as TDs and Senator, etc., is there anything practical as a committee that we can do in response to the issues that you've raised. While we may not all agree on everything, and clearly there are people here who have a much more benign view of pharmaceutical companies than I do, we are all agreed that the current system is not working, that it's certainly not delivering for patients, and a system whereby the sick person that makes the most noise is the one that gets the treatment is not a good system. None of us can stand over it. So, I mean, we could pin all our hopes on a Damascene conversion for the big pharmaceutical companies in relation to morality, or we could consider what practical steps we as a committee could take to address the issue. So if you had a suggestion in that regard and something that we as a committee could do to address some of the issues that are raised, notwithstanding the variance of views, I think we're all united around the fact that the system is currently not fit for purpose, it's not working and it's not delivering for patients. Thanks, Chair.
I think it would be useful if the committee could explore further how much money the Irish government does in fact invest in public research, and to see if there is any public health gains attached to such investment, or if there are any potential for public health gains to be attached to such investment.
Indeed, if we could attach a proviso that further public investment is on the basis of a return for public health.
Yes.
I mean, that shouldn't be a wild or strange concept, but
no.
Maybe it is. No. So we should look at that.
And specifically, I suppose we would ask that it would include, would have conditions of transparency, that for public funds that we could find that we would be entitled to ask, well, so how is the money spent? And secondly, some price control into any subsequently successful drugs, that we would have some advantage when it comes to paying for products.
It's a hard one to. It's hard to define exactly what the investment is, because if you have already built the lab and the lab is already staffed,
yes,
and then you get a company that sponsors a bursary for 30 or 40,000, their investment is on paper 30 or 40,000, but the state has already invested in the bricks and mortar, in the personnel that are there, in the person that comes to clean the place, to the lights that are turned on. It is hard to do it, but I don't think it's impossible to do it, and I don't think that it is impossible that that future investment must be linked to some sort of return for and some sort of public health gain, and I don't think that's an outrageous thing to ask, Chair. Do you think that's outrageous?
I think you're probably going to be interviewing other stakeholders in the coming weeks, and I think it would be just great if we could, if the committee could maybe commission a report and just bring together all that evidence, and we'd be happy to come back again, at the end, and if you had any further questions for us or anything like that, just something to explore, the real root causes for the problem that we're in. And taking examples from other countries who have done similar, like the Netherlands, the UK and Canada. Yeah.
I might just add to that. I know a lot of the committee members were interested in what had been done in other countries, and it might be interesting to invite some academics and politicians, particularly the Dutch Minister for Health, and the Dutch Ellen de Hoon, who's an academic in the Netherlands, who have worked and who have actually made progress in this area, and there might be learning. There might be opportunities for the committee to learn from their experience.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Deputy Durkan?
To say that I think that's the key to what we're about. I think we need to engage with our colleagues across Europe. We need, as politicians as well, on this issue. I believe that some of the countries are making efforts to avail of the benefits of the European market, but for some unknown reason it doesn't get traction. And we have all the excuses back and forth. The last 20, 30 years has been the same old story. And that shouldn't be. We should be able to record progress. And it would be in the interest of the pharmaceutical companies as well. If they're dealing with a big market, they want to supply a big market. They want to supply the United States, they want to supply Europe. Europe is a bigger market than the United States by a long shot. And I think that we need to encourage them in that direction insofar as we can. And I think to the European Commission we have to do that as well. So I think, Mr. Chairman, there's an opportunity for us there to engage with our European colleagues on this issue, because I have believed, and everybody else obviously likewise, for a long time, that there's no other way to do it. There's no other way that we can achieve for our patients who are in need of particular treatment now or at any other time, other than through the benefit of the power of the European market. Can't be done. Some pharmaceutical companies have bigger budgets than some of the countries in Europe, some of the smaller countries.
Well, certainly the present model that we have is unsustainable, because the number of drugs that will come onto the market over the next 5 years for rare and ultra-rare diseases and for new cancer treatments is going to be so costly that I don't think there is any health system that can afford to supply them all. So we do need to change our model on how we deal with pharmaceutical companies, because it's just going to be unaffordable. And as you say, what is the benefit compared to other health initiatives like supporting people in the community, looking after frail elderly people at home, looking after our hospital structures, and developing our new model of care, Sláinte Care, which is, in the doldrums at the moment. So, Deputy O'Connell, have you any final comments?
Final question. Yeah. There was, I can't remember, one of the companies, or maybe a few of the companies, were saying things like, let's say we have 100 patients with X condition, and sort of putting a top price on an annual treatment. So saying that if there was 102 patients, that the 2 people would be included in the bulk price. If you could maybe expand on that to your view, because to me I see this as the market yet again ring fencing a chunk of money, so therefore they can say to their shareholders, well, we definitely have a return of €100 on last year's research. So it's just something that's emerging a bit recently with the orphan drugs. And if you have any insight into, do you think that's a good model to be going with or not, and maybe the pros and cons of that sort of way of going about things?
I think they did use that model in Australia to fund hepatitis C treatment, and actually it worked. My understanding is it works very well. They said we will treat on a population basis. We don't care how many people are. We will roll up as many as you want, and we will actually offer an option. And I think that was a successful model. I don't know what the figure, but I think that's within. Having said that, we're saying a successful model because it might be, say, €10,000 per head compared to the initial price of €80,000. However, we know that the cost of Hep C treatment to manufacture is €100. So, I mean, it depends on where you're coming from. It's a less bad option that I would, in some cases, but of course it depends on what that was their.
And they were well able to absorb that into.
And perhaps that would have. It's not my area of expertise, but would it be true to say that that sort of mechanism would work if it was a population health issue, like hepatitis or HIV or HPV or anything that you want to eradicate? It makes sense. But in terms of a small rare disease patient cohort, would it be true to say there's not necessarily the ideal way of going about it? Because they're obviously they've their sums done on this. And just in terms of your reference in your response to, I can't remember where I wrote down now, but the assessing the impact of treatment, so be it physiotherapy, be it home help, we seem to be so honed in on the price of a drug and drug therapies, and we seem to be so focused on, obviously we want to cure illness, but that spectrum between not curing and curing, that whole spectrum. So if you could maybe elaborate on that to some extent, if you have anything else to say on that in that particular area.
I thought I was picking it up from something that you said. No, but I have heard of it. In fact, at our conference last year in RCSI on access to medicines, the point was made by one of the health economists that there's a lot of research. That we are talking about the prices of one drug against another, whereas in fact there's other interventions like physiotherapy, and that nobody ever seems to think of actually doing it. And it did resonate with me, and particularly when you mentioned there you've got 2 patients, one with inequality and one being spent €500,000. And if you were to say to them, we've actually, I suspect, in fact, we've got this amount of money to spend on your care. Do you want it on this drug, or do you want it on other things? Can we change your house? Can we get a special car for you? Can we get fitted?
A package of care.
If you've got to say, this is the amount of money we've got to spend, a lot of the time it will not be going the way of the drug company, but unfortunately,
I think we do just want to be clear that we do want Irish patients to have access to the drugs, and we believe we can do better in getting a fairer price, and that the opportunity cost would then, not be so high, and that would be able to provide, like Kieran as a GP. There's a recent study that shows, physicians who feel they can't provide, adequate social services to their patients have much higher rates of burnout, and like we're all seeing that. We know we want to do so much more for our patients, but we're very, very constrained. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy O'Connell. So, thank you very much for coming in this morning, Robbie Lawler, Dr. Kieran Harkin, and Dr. Ciara Conlon, for your expert views on the pricing of medicine and the availability of medicines both Ireland and abroad. I expect that we will be having a number of other meetings on this topic, and produce a report, hopefully, which would inform government on developing a national drug policy. So thank you very much. This committee is now adjourned until next Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. Is that agreed? Thank you.